a growing concern around what future of queerness looks like, particularly in India, where it has been prone to pinkwashing and appropriation and co-opting by other movements. This is something that will be incredibly useful for the ways in which we conceptualize the struggle going forward, and also to get a general understanding of what the stakes are of the issues that we have in front of us today. So I'm very, very excited to have all of you here today, many friends, many previous collaborators, and people who have been so generous with their time and their advocacy over so many years. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly introduce all of them. And I don't think these introductions do them justice, because they are phenomenal individuals in their own right, and you should all read up on them and please sort of see the work they're doing, because they truly represent some of the most powerful advocacy that's coming out. But without further ado, the first panelist I want to introduce is Vyjayanti Vasanta Mogli, who is a trans woman who has worked towards both legal and substantive equality. Vyjayanti, in order to secure rights for gender and sexual minorities, has filed FIRs, engaged in litigation, and organized marches and consultations. Through organizations like the Telangana Hijra, Intersex, and Transgender Samiti, she has helped collectivize for common benefit. Vyjayanti is a familiar face to all of you who might have worked in Hyderabad or in the larger Telangana area, or any of you who've been tracking the incredible number of PILs that she has filed in high courts around the country. The next person I want to introduce is Shubha. Shubha Chacko is a veteran gender and sexuality rights activist. She has had over 25 years of experience in NGO management and has been featured in various publications. Currently, Shubha serves as executive director of the Solidarity Foundation, where she works towards community building and leadership building for gender and sexual minorities, as well as sex workers. Again, Shubha is based in Bangalore, just like Jayna, and is a familiar face on the circuit for anyone who happens to visit. The third person I want to introduce is Rafiul Alom Rahman. Rafiul is the founder of the Queer Muslim Project, an initiative to highlight intersectional experiences. He represents India at UN Women's Beijing +25 Global Youth Task Force. Rafiul has also been recognized as a young changemaker by the Hindu Business Line, among others, and is just a powerhouse in all ways. And finally, we have Jayna. Jayna Kothari is managing trustee at the Center for Law and Policy Research. She was an advocate in the Section 377 case, among various other legal challenges. Her organization provides legal assistance to trans folks and has also published an equality law proposal, besides various other justice-based research projects. They're also running an intersectionality fellowship, if I'm not wrong, Jayna, which would be very lovely to sort of bring up here later in the conversation for people to also be aware of and encourage others to apply to. So I want to sort of kick off this discussion in sort of ways out to quickly introduce myself. My name is Anish Gawande. I am curator over at Pink List India. I also run the Dara Shikoh Fellowship in Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. I write, translate, and work on fields of queerness and politics in Francophone West Africa and South Asia. So quickly, I want to begin this conversation and stop speaking so much myself by posing a question to Jayna. Right? Jayna, the past few years have seen a renewed focus on intersectionality, right? The queer movement in India, however, has been criticized for its lack of engagement with multiple marginalizations, especially after the focus on 377 and marriage equality. So I want you to share a little bit about what this journey has been like, especially in an organization that has such a diversity of experiences within itself, and how that's pushed you to sort of explore an equality law over at CLPR, and to expand the conversation around LGBTQIA+ rights to include concerns of diverse communities.
Thanks, Anish. And thanks for bringing up this important issue of an equality legislation and intersectionality. So, I think the history of activism around LGBTQI issues, legal activism, kind of for many years, for almost 20 years, was kind of focused on Section 377, on really decriminalizing Section 377. And after that happened in 2018, the issues then were, okay, there has been decriminalization. Now what? Because the decriminalization, the Navtej judgment didn't give positive rights, and only decriminalized same-sex consensual same-sex conduct. But what about all the other areas of discrimination that people were still experiencing in a very, very real and large way? So that was certainly one issue. But at CLPR, in our work, because our work, certainly one of the key areas of work of focus is transgender rights, but we also work on discrimination in the areas of caste, in the areas of sex equality, disability rights, and our work. And all my other panelists would kind of vouch for it, that when you work on discrimination, you realize that discrimination is experienced by people not on the basis of one identity alone, but on many different fronts. Because as people, we have several identities that we wear all the time. I may be a woman, but when I'm in the UK, I'm an Asian woman, and so I face discrimination not only by my sex, but also by my nationality, my skin color, my food habits, and so many other grounds, right? And that's the same with the LGBTQI community as well. So one of our areas of focus over the last couple of years has been to initiate the conversation about the need for an equality law in India. This conversation had initiated or had kind of started maybe 5 years ago, I think around 2014 or 15, but then it kind of died down. But I think the decisions of the Nalsa judgment, the decisions in the Navtej judgment, where there have been strong kind of recognition of sexual orientation and gender identity rights, I think renewed this need for this conversation, that we need to have an overarching equality law. And that's what we felt in our work. And so we kind of started working on it. And we started working on it through consultations with different groups across the country. And one thing, what we realized very strongly, is that not only does an overarching equality law, of course, sorry, so I just want to kind of preface it by saying that, the early conversations in India were about, a specific law for transgender persons, so therefore we got the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. And so how many specific identity-based laws are we going to have? Are we going to have, if we have 25 protected grounds, are we tomorrow going to have 25 different legislations? Certainly not. So one issue was certainly that we needed one overarching equality law, so that all forms of discrimination and protected grounds could be kind of covered within it. But the second issue also was that it has to be intersectional, because that's the reality of our lives. And so when we talk about different protected grounds, so the equality law that we've drafted, and it's up on our website, it's called the Equality Bill 2020. It's a bill that is constantly being updated and improved. This is about the third or fourth draft that we have. We invite people who are interested to please take a look, trash it out, give us your feedback, because that's what we are trying to get. So we cover the bill covers different protected grounds of caste, disability, gender identity, sex characteristics, political beliefs, occupation, class, and class is termed as socioeconomic disadvantage, nationality, race, descent. So many different grounds, which are grounds on which people face discrimination, often together with their gender identity, sex characteristics, and sexual orientation. So like our co-panelist Rafiul would talk about the Queer Muslim Project. How do we experience, or how does the law take into account the experience of someone who's queer and who's from a minority religion? And the fact that you're not just queer and from a minority religion, but the fact that the law should recognize as intersectionality because the kind of discrimination you face is different. It's different from just what a person from a minority religion would face and different from what a queer person would face. It's not the sum of its parts. It's more than the sum of its parts. And that's what intersectionality theory is about. It's not just one and two. It's far more than two. So we try to kind of recognize this form of intersectional discrimination and also expand the scope of rights for LGBTQI persons, because for too long the conversation has just been about decriminalization. And in fact, even within the Transgender Persons Act, which has faced great kind of critical which has faced great criticism, one of the issues with the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act is that it talks about gender recognition in a very inadequate way, but it also addresses some criminal offenses. But it does not talk about discrimination. It talks about discrimination in a very half-hearted way, but the rules removed even a definition of discrimination. What do we mean by discrimination? What do we mean by equality? We don't have a single legislation which define equality and discrimination. And the reality is of all our daily lives is that we face discrimination in school, at university, in employment, in housing. The largest forms of discrimination are housing related, where people are thrown out of their rental accommodation, discrimination in healthcare, discrimination in access to public places. So we need a law that not only certainly encompasses the rights of LGBTQI persons, but the rights of all on all different protected grounds. And that's what we tried to do in formulating this equality bill. We don't have an overarching anti-discrimination law in India. At the moment, we just have a few different legislations, but they are not adequate. So we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which is a civil equality law, one can say, for persons with disabilities, but it is highly inadequate because it doesn't protect persons with disabilities from discrimination by the private sector. It doesn't. We have the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act, which looks at caste-based discrimination, but it is only a criminal law. So it does not address caste-based discrimination in our day-to-day activities. Only if there is a criminal offense or an atrocity, you can go and file a police complaint. But you cannot use this law to prevent unequal treatment, for example, in school on the basis of your caste. We don't have in India even a sex-based anti-discrimination law. We have an equal pay, equal remuneration act. We have Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, but we don't have a law which even protects women against unequal treatment. So I think the time is really right now in India for an equality law. We are seeing authoritarianism rising. And this authoritarian, one of the impacts of this rising authoritarianism is a clampdown on rights. And I think the time is right for an equality law. And I think the demand for an equality law or the impetus has come from the work done by the LGBTQI community and the victories that they've got. So I think the momentum has come from there, but I think we need to expand and use it for an overarching equality law. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Jayna. I think that's a brilliant overview also of the sort of legal landscape around sort of justice and around legal recognition of rights and prevention of discrimination. I want to shift the focus a little bit now and go to Vyjayanti, because Vyjayanti, you've been a founder member of THITS. You filed innumerable petitions in the courts to demand rights for queer and trans communities, in addition to extensive engagement with the SC/ST Atrocities Act. You've also been one of the earliest voices to speak up against conversion therapy. And in fact, you've seen the other side of the law, right? The law that exists but does not get implemented. So what do you think are other sort of challenges in the implementation of the law on a day-to-day basis in the work that you have been doing? And what do you think are the possibilities that the law opens up?
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity. One moment. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Right. So while in April 2014, the Apex Court delivered a historic and watershed Nalsa judgment, and it's more than 6.5 years since its passage. It had a 6th deadline for implementation, and it's more than 6 years since that expired. And out of the 29 states, and I don't exactly know the number of union territories now, just about 7 or 8 have begun, and Telangana, my state where I live, is yet one of the non-starters. The Nalsa judgment was a baby step, the first of its kind, and in as much as Justice Radhakrishnan and Justice Sikri intended to offer constitutional guarantees were already there. They were only reinforcing and just reiterating it through the judgment. A judgment all by itself is so not enough. The central and state governments, particularly the state governments, now that the government of India has done something which is grossly inadequate and at some levels is replete with many, not just structural challenges, but structural monstrosities, the state governments will need to implement whatever's good within that mess, whatever can be implemented, whatever the diversity of transgender communities and voices want implemented, have been demanding for long. And this will need to be done at the ground level by state governments and local self-governments and municipal corporations and so on. Unfortunately, as I said here, Telangana is a non-starter despite multiple representations to the tune of at least representation a quarter in these 6 years, which means 6 into 6, which is 36 representations. And in 2018, 6 into 4 is 24. So 24. 4 into 4, 16. So with 16 representations that went unanswered to the Chief Minister's office, Chief Secretary's office, Home Minister, Home Secretary, Law Minister, Law Secretary, Women Development, the Child Welfare Minister, and its Secretary, Health Minister, Secretary, so on and so forth. We were constrained to file a public interest case of public interest litigation through CLPR, and Jayna was our lawyer, and we had some interim relief, but the state of Telangana has not even responded, has not even filed a counter. Through that and the other PILs that we filed, be it the Telangana Eunuchs Act or the slew of measures and interim orders on COVID relief across Medicare, food security, and a few other things. What we also realized that the PIL rules across high courts at some levels, I wouldn't say all high courts always, but at some levels, I'm sorry to say this, but are just ridiculous because they require a quarterly balance of something like 1 lakh or 2 lakhs. Public interest litigation, particularly when disenfranchised and marginalized communities take that up, I'm not sure if these disenfranchised and marginalized communities can maintain a minimum quarterly balance of lakhs, one. Secondly, just the other day, while I am not a Dalit person, I'm also not a Savarna person. And I have a lot of Dalit transgender friends who from time to time, if not always, from time to time, have faced caste-based discrimination and atrocities from the quote-unquote mainstream society, and sometimes even from within communities. In as much as we may wish to wish away caste, caste is so not past yet. And it exists like air, and it's ubiquitous and omnipresent, and trans or queer communities are no exception. Just the other day, we discovered that the National Human Rights Commission, which is supposed to be the most venerable institution, a torchbearer and a watchdog of human rights in the country, has limited, when online complaints are launched, it limits the attachments to be less than 2 MB. Imagine the plight of those marginalized communities who barely have any access to internet, who may not be internet savvy. And every field says not more than 45 characters, not more than 90 characters. Victims who are traumatized, I'm not sure if they will have that peace of mind to offer it in a very concise, crunched way for the Honorable National Human Rights Commission. I think it's high time the National Human Rights Commission relook at its own obsolescent website. One. Second, the NHRC website, yet when there are options male, female, and I was aghast to see that instead of transgender, it says both. What on earth does both mean? It's just like a slap on my face and on the faces of so many other queer and transgender persons. That apart, now you also spoke of conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is being practiced by medical professionals, and conversion therapy is also being practiced as curative violence by parents who are not medical professionals. Because conversion therapy is just one word. It's part of a larger curative violence edifice or juggernaut. So parents, families, schools, and also the God persons like God men, God persons, God women, and so on. While to an extent we have laws that govern the conduct of doctors who pass out and they're regulated under law, the Rehabilitation Council of India Act, I don't think is robust enough to regulate conversion therapy and to monitor the way non-medical mental health professionals are administering it. So there is a clear vacuum in the law. There's a void in the law, and the Rehabilitation Council of India Act was enacted like 2 decades ago. I don't think it's up to speed, and it needs to be revamped in a major way. Then there are many other things, but specific to Telangana and specific to the places where I work, apart from caste, as Jayna said, intersectionality. What about, how does the Trans Act address intersectional issues of atrocities, discrimination, marginalizations of those across caste, class, disability? There are a lot of trans persons who are Dalit, and those trans persons with disability. In disability hostels now, I have met quite a few trans persons. They may not be out in and open about their gender identity and may be performing the gender assigned to them at birth. But there are quite a few, may not be all across India, but there are quite a few trans persons. They are also very worried about how they will come out, because if a person is assigned female at birth and is in a women's disability hostel, identifies as a trans man, that person's very scared about being thrown out of the women's disability hostel if they were to come out as a trans man, because you see the government disability hostels are under a lot of pressure. They are waiting for people to vacate, and there are a lot of other people in queue waiting to get in. So our people are so scared to even live their gender, to say that they are trans persons with disability for the fear of being thrown out of government disability hostels. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act, the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Rule 2020, and the states must formulate policies and GOs to ensure that such intersectional challenges are addressed, that the law does not, instead of protecting people, the law doesn't inadvertently create more problems. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Vyjayanti. I think that's a really insightful sort of take on how the law operates, right? And how the sort of structural violence almost of the law and lack of access to the law, even after the sort of achievement of milestones in courtrooms, continues almost unquestioned. I really want to sort of bring you in here, Shubha, because you're doing incredible work with the Solidarity Foundation. The project that I have admired, at least from a distance, is the one on engaging and sort of training grassroots queer communities to sort of interface with the state and to engage with the state in multifarious ways, because often as queer folks, right, we are not taught how to engage with the state. Because of the very nature of queerness as being something that, because earlier of criminalization and after because of societal discrimination, is something that actively avoids or seeks to hide away from the state. You don't grow up being included in these conversations or feeling that you are a part of them. And I know that you really wanted to talk about and have been speaking about the almost everydayness, right, of law and policies in the lives of non-English speaking gender and sexual minorities. So I'd love to hear your views on the work that you've been doing, the political leadership training and fellowship that you organize with Solidarity Foundation, and how you see all of these sort of suprastructures operate on a local level.
Thank you so much for having me here. Really excited and happy. We've had a great start already. So let me start by telling you about a few people and some things that have happened in their life. I start with my colleague Veena, and Veena contested the local elections years ago, and Veena is a trans woman. She's also Dalit and lives in an area which is where it's a slum, which is a a poor settlement. And when she contested for the elections at the cooperative level, at the the municipality level, many people were like, besides the whole idea of having to get her papers through as a trans woman and get recognized and be able to contest, many people also raised the question of, why would you want to get involved in this? Why would you as a trans woman want to get engaged with this? Why don't you only work for trans people? Because this, if you stand for a corporator, you're supposed to work for the entire community, your entire ward, your entire, So this question of that you should somehow as a trans woman be limited in your struggle and your vision and your ideas of a future only to issues that so-called concern trans people, like as if issues around water, sanitation, schools, etc. do not concern trans people, itself was for me quite revealing, that this way that the issues are framed. So the issues are framed in terms of that these are the legitimate issues for trans people to take up, and these are not. So that was just one area I want to tell you about how, issues around how do we actually, this got us thinking on actually building political leadership. And what we understood as political leadership was, yes, engaging with the state, because yes, the state is a big animal, with many arms, like an octopus, but you have to engage with it, especially if you are from the disenfranchised communities. So then, whether it is for your daily living in terms of health, in terms of access to subsidized food, through your ration shop, through any other, sort of entitlements, if you are from a socioeconomic background where your class comes up, you have to access the state. And so negotiating with the state, I mean, one arm of the state is the the offensive and violent police and other arms. But even in this side of this phase of the state, which is the health or the ration shop or whatever, it is not that those places are free of discrimination or abuse or violence. So how then do you change the discourse for people from the gender sexual minority community to understand themselves as right bearers? That means you're not just asking for something, saying, please give me this or please give me that, but you're saying that this is my right to get it. And so the idea of citizenship was one that got employed, that we claim it as citizens. And we understand that citizenship is a very contested area, because on one hand, it brings together many people who've been excluded from the idea of citizenship and access to various, to participate, to public space, all those things. We also understand that citizenship, of who is a good citizenship and who deserves citizenship in this country, is become extremely vexed question of who is, we have laws now that will tell us whether we are deemed worthy of being citizens. We also have the liberal idea of a citizen as one who pays taxes and one who is a model citizen. So we understand it's a contested area, but I think what it has done is it allows for actually people who have been excluded to come together and form solidarity links with each other. And that is part of what we've done through the fellowship also. So the fellowship helps you, first of all, understand what are the structures of this, what are the different structures of the state. It gives you some tools to engage, whether it's the RTI, whether it is, contesting elections, whether it is getting onto committees, all of which you deserve to have a place on. And it also helps you build allies with other people who are excluded. And we also emphasize that the leadership brings, it is not just the one person, but it is a collective that has to back you. Because in this country, for you to get your rights, you need protests on the streets, you need people writing in, you need a lot of things to happen. And it's not just one or two, there's a limitation to one or two celebrities going and getting rights, because I think it takes away from the whole thing that this has been a collective struggle of so many years of so many people, and especially people who are, really had their backs to the wall, coming out there and putting their literally lives on the line. And that is how change has happened. It has not happened only, through a very neat kind of legal process. It's been messy, it's been complicated. And I think it's time to acknowledge that. And that is what the fellowship does. It tries to build grassroots level leaders who will participate, but with the backing of a collective. It's not atomized individuals who will be going out there and trying to do something. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Shubha. I think that's a really important framework to bring into this as well, because how do you create the discourse around equality, the sort of almost emotional and political push that forces the state into action, because we know that the state does not take any action otherwise. And I want to just sort of wonder about how that collectivization takes place, right? Especially because queerness is such a strange marginality, because it includes within it so many other marginalities. I think I want to go back a little bit to what Vyjayanti said, that often discrimination comes from within the community, that we cannot erase the idea and the fact that today you have casteist members of the queer community, Islamophobic members of the queer community, people who reject sort of any conversations around disability rights. And I want to take this focus to Rafiul, because Rafiul, with the Queer Muslim Project, you've really been doing that sort of legwork within queer spaces, right? You've converted these theoretical conversations around intersectionality into practice. I love the Audre Lorde quote that there is no single issue struggle because there is no single issue oppression, right? And this is something that with TQMP you've worked on, and particularly in the last few months, in the past year, highlighted the fact that as queer folks, you don't have a single identity, right? You don't have just one thing that you can fight for. I want to know what that process has been like, Rafiul, particularly on a digital space, particularly in terms of the pushback you've received, but also in terms of the possibilities that has opened up. So what gives you hope and what fills you despair in these conversations within the queer community right now?
Thank you so much, Anish. You asked a bunch of questions, but just wanted to acknowledge that some really important points have already been shared and made by the panelists here. And I'm just going to add to all that has been shared. Definitely for a comprehensive anti-discrimination bill, Jayna. So I think that should be our foremost demand for now, more than anything else. And I definitely agree with what Vyjayanti and Shubha also shared. The answer to your question is, how has the journey been? It's not been easy. And it isn't easy because it is a difficult journey. But I think, when you are from a marginalized group within the queer community, I think the challenges are manifold, and I don't want to repeat it. But I feel what is the biggest challenge is that sometimes you see that there's no hope. And I think, and for me, what is a radical, what I would consider a radical thing is to see hope even in moments of despair. And we've been doing a bunch of things. In fact, and before I actually talk about the Queer Muslim Project, I want to mention where the Queer Muslim Project came from. To a great extent, it's been informed by my own journey, as a queer and a Muslim person in this country. And I, when for a long time, I felt that that this was not the thing to be, and that there was a contradiction, because that's what you're often told, that you cannot be gay and Muslim. I mean, these two words don't fit in together. And and I mean, as much as you see homophobic attitudes or transphobic attitudes within Muslim spaces, sometimes it is not. I mean, queer spaces are not the utopias that we want to think of. They can be equally discriminatory. And for a long time, what haunted me was the fact that there was actually an absence of leadership and voices. I mean, when you look at the queer movement in India itself, how many Muslim, faces can you think of? I mean, or names. I mean, and this is a very, very stark reminder that even I was, faced with at one point. Um, so one of the biggest things that for me was important is that how do I take back the narrative? Because I feel that too often our stories are told by somebody else, and I'm going to share a little story. So in 2016, I had applied for a passport, and I was in Delhi. I had got into a fully funded PhD program. I had to go to the US. I needed to write GRE. So I applied, and my landlord had consented to be the local witness when I was submitting the applications. But the day the local policeman who came to verify my address, my landlord flatly refused. He said, I cannot sign it. And I was quite taken aback. I was shocked. I was like, how can you do this? I have only a month left. I need to get this done. He's like, no, you find somebody else. I cannot verify for you. Even though I'd been living in that house for more than 3 years, I'd been a good tenant, paying my rents on time, all of that, but I was quite taken aback. I was quite hurt, disheartened at that point, because I felt, he shouldn't have done that. I somehow worked out a way. I got somebody else who was a neighbor, who was quite kind and wanted to support me. And so the next day when I visited the police station, to talk to that policeman, he asked a friend of mine who had accompanied me in my absence, ki ye vaisa hai kya? Hinting at my kind of identity. And my friend was just like, as a matter of fact, he just nodded. So when I came back, this policeman's behavior changes. He's like, आपको games पसंद हैं? आप कौन से college में हो? आप क्या पसंद करते हो? I mean, I was quite taken aback. I was like, here's this stout policeman. At one point, he was so angry and rude, but suddenly he's changed. So I just got my papers signed, etc., and I left. So on my way, my friend told me that, when you had gone, when you were away, this cop actually asked me about you. And when I said yes, he tried to make all kinds of justifications कि भगवान ने ऐसा बना दिया, या कुछ जीन में डिफेक्ट होता है ऐसे लोगों की, and that made me realize that while my Muslim identity was such a tension, right? That there was this fear that my landlord actually feared that verifying on my behalf could someday throw him in the jail, right? Because I could commit some sort of crime as a Muslim. But the discovery of my queer identity somehow diffused that tension. So it almost felt like because I'm queer, I'm weak. I don't carry that same power or potential, and it was quite striking because that's how you are always framed. How often do we get to tell our stories? How often do we get to just be who we are in all our, kind of in the many different ways we are. And with the Queer Muslim Project, I'm quite proud to share that over the, very recently, in fact, over the past few years, we have been able to build a global community. We have used Instagram quite actively, but we do a lot of offline engagement. And today, in fact, we, just before this panel, we launched our latest publication. It's called Queer Muslim Futures, a collection of visions, utopias, and dreams. This is part of like a workshop series that we conducted in September called Queer Muslim Futures, because we felt that at this point when everything is so, there is this hopelessness and despair creeping in, as marginalized groups, as people who've been pushed to the brink, how do we find hope? And I think that's the thing for me. Um, it's not been an easy journey. I think our movement has a long, and I mean, this has already been shared. The nuances, the law has, of course, not always benefited us. Even when you have laws, we know that societal perceptions and how the police and and other people view you, that shifts the whole equation. So, but I feel what is important is that that we continue to have these conversations, and that we have spaces where we can recognize our own, and these gaps, and move forward. I and yeah, that's it for now. Thank you, Anish.
Thank you so much, Rafiul, for sharing. I think that's an incredibly powerful narrative. And I think taking back narratives is such an important sort of part of the struggle for equality, and this idea that we need to sort of reclaim, right, what has been lost and develop voices through various frameworks. And it touches very personally because I think you said you couldn't be queer and Muslim. For me, it was you can't be queer and in politics, which led to the creation of Pink List India and sort of advocacy in the political space. And I want to sort of broach this conversation a little further and push it into two sort of specific directions, right? I think one is in this sort of legal entanglement that we find ourselves, and sometimes that I have found myself with the Pink List as well, right? There is a challenge where you question the potential of pushing a particular method to its hilt, right? I think with politics, the danger has been when we started off Pink List India, we didn't really realize the potential of pinkwashing within the political space that would unleash itself just months after we had created the platform. Um, we're seeing a hijacking of LGBT rights outside of the context of other marginalizations by the current authoritarian state to justify its sort of human rights abuses in other parts, and to sort of also also pinkwash and wokewash its track records in other ways, right from presenting the Transgender Persons Rights Act, which is incredibly problematic, as a progressive legislation on the world stage, to justifying sort of abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir as a victory for LGBTQIA+, right? So how do we understand sort of the legal space or the sort of community-based activism space, or I feel like the digital activism space, or a sort of community-led and within community space, as one that carries with it the dangers of appropriation, that carries with it the dangers of being sort of manipulated? And how do we sort of think about those things early on and prevent that co-option? And I'd love any of you to sort of jump in, whoever sort of wants to jump into this, please feel free to go ahead. And I just want to add that please feel free to ask questions as well. I'm going to ask only one question after this, and then we'll keep it open to audience questions. So think of a question, either ask it in the chat box, DM it to me if you're not comfortable having your name attached to the question, or raise your hand and then I can call upon you and you can unmute yourself and we can see you.
Anish, do you mind repeating the question?
So in the different forms of activism that everyone is involved in, from legal to community-based to sort of training community members to engage with the state, how do we avoid or how do we prevent the dangers of pinkwashing or the sort of manipulation of the fights that we are fighting to serve other ends, right? And how do we sort of actively signpost against it and ensure that the movements we are a part of don't get put into a structure that we don't want to be a part of? Go ahead, Shubha.
So I think, yeah, so, I think that one identity is important, but I think the coming together has to also have an ideological and ethical base. And that means that you recognize not just where you have been oppressed, where you have been left out, where you have been rejected, but also where you have privilege, where you have rejected other people, where you have taken on, where you have violated other people's rights. And I think this allows for, if you have coming together, which is more ideological and is, and the underpinning is social justice and dignity. And I think the word dignity is very important, and because not just justice, because justice becomes very legal, but dignity is about every individual, and it's something people understand innately. Like when we talk to people, human rights is a language that takes little more time to understand, especially when you translate to local languages, etc. But people understand and know when their dignity has been violated, when and so I think coming together on a platform around the idea of dignity and everybody's dignity, and the idea of privilege and non-privilege, and this that I think is a way to counter, and so you have to build strong allies and solidarity links with people who are quite different from you. And I think and it's not easy. Those dialogues are difficult. Those conversations are going to be very tough, because all of us have as much unlearning in that process. But I think that's the only way forward, if we all hold hands together in these very, very dark times.
And I think also, I mean, just to add on, I mean, this was exactly what was going through my mind before Shubha spoke, that we don't see, I mean, there is a need for movements to build allies across issues. And I think it's very important in the LGBTQI movements, but it's also important in other movements. It's, so for example, when we talk about trans persons with disabilities, you don't see the disability rights movement and the trans LGBT movement kind of collaborating, or kind of, if there is an issue where the disability rights are being violated, trans persons should take them up, and vice versa. Similarly, even within the very kind of older, I wouldn't say older or younger, but I'm saying that even within the feminist or women's movements, other issues, you may have issues of caste or minority religions being taken up, but not necessarily LGBTQI issues. So I think across movements, stronger involvement and collaborations have to happen. Not only then will we kind of be more mindful of the intersectionalities and the different experiences, but I think also these other issues which you raised, Anish, would kind of lessen.
If I may just add, I think am I audible? Okay. So what I was saying is that I think the approach is quite important, as both Shubha and Jayna pointed out. For our work, for instance, we I know a lot of people I often get asked this question, why the queer Muslim project and why not just the queer project? I mean, there is like, this is a question that's often asked, and then we are also often reduced to just Islamic theology and a faith-based organization, which we are not in the traditional sense, because our approach to faith itself is very, we look at it from a more feminist sort of framework, uh, and critically at faith. Even Islam, we look at it critically rather than, just, I mean, I think that's how we have to approach, these institutions. So, I think therefore that framing is very important. That approach itself is very important, and certainly, I mean, there is a tendency. We too often, we are so burdened. We end up working in silos. But I think that needs to change, and I think we need to have more conversations and connections. And this cannot, be said again and again and again. But we need to do it. Yeah.
Uh, if I may add a few things here, and I am very much in agreement with all that was said by Shubha, Rafiul, and Jayna. I have given a rule for myself, and I didn't invent this rule. I learned it from a few other activists. That, for instance, in my own example, I am not a Savarna person. I'm an OBC trans person, but at the same time, I'm not a Dalit trans person, nor am I a Muslim trans person or a Muslim queer person. So when I am interacting, working, listening, working with people who have historically been denied much more than me, I will shut up and listen. I need to learn to pass on the mic. And I may not do that with those who have historically been more privileged than me. I will be respectful, but I will not give away what is rightfully mine. And again, it's not as binary because we can get very easily lost in these kind of binary, simplistic rules. There's a lot in between, and it's just not about gender binary, but it's also there's no binary ideology either. So it is very important that I keep questioning if I am knowingly, unknowingly, because as much as I am a loving, forgiving person, I'm also aware that there are monstrosities within me, and I must be very mindful of those demons within myself. It's very easy to show others the mirror, but what about showing myself the mirror? Yeah. Now, and I just want to add one thing here, which is not to do with this bit that you raised, but with the earlier bit. Going back to the law, in certain high courts, when PILs are filed, they put out the entire name, address, phone number, Aadhaar card, bank account details of the PIL litigants, and it's out on the High Court website. Anybody can access that. Anybody can land up at that litigant's home because the litigant's entire postal address, email ID, phone number, Aadhaar card, PAN card, bank account details, all of those are available for public consumption. This was one point that I forgot earlier. So I'm done. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, everyone. Now I'm gonna stop with my questions and start taking audience questions that have started coming in as well. And the first one that I've received privately is one that I think will just quickly build upon this, which is how best can the South Asian LGBTQ plus diaspora support the local movement in India? And what actions of those in the diaspora could hinder the progress of the movement?
So, is it addressed to?
Open-ended question,
Okay,
but I think
so
I will deal with a lot of diaspora because TQMP does have sort of perspectives coming in from across the board. So how do you navigate that space?
no, definitely. I mean, we do work with folks across South Asia, and I think it is quite context specific. So, I mean, our context is quite different. I mean, for instance, even with the Queer Muslim Project, we recognize that Muslim minority and Muslim majority contexts can be different in how queer people experience their rights or the very experience of faith it differs. And so I definitely think that there are bridges to be built, especially given that in many ways our states at this moment are not, I mean, we are facing similar issues in many ways, but I also feel that it's important to recognize local voices. Like I often one thing that I'm quite mindful of is the fact that even though the Queer Muslim Project is increasingly assuming a regional sort of an identity, but many of us are operating from India and within our very own limitations. So I cannot, for instance, speak for somebody in Bangladesh. And I feel that that's a very important, I mean, there has to be solidarity, but I think we need to have enough space to recognize and support local leadership. So that's a simple thing that I would like to add here. Yeah.
I think the diaspora can play. Sorry. I think the diaspora can play a role in amplifying less heard voices rather than creating just a few superstars, of the movement, but try to patiently work through and understand people who's, so there may be a gap in the language. I'm not just talking about, whether they speak the local, a regional language or don't speak English, but also, can people from the diaspora wait patiently and hear and listen to voices that may not be, from the superstars, but maybe more marginalized on various accounts. So then what happens is that you actually do work to broad base the movement. You actually bring in more concerns and issues that may not get reflected by just the 2 or 3 voices that there are. And the 2 or 3 voices or the 5 voices that are there already are important, but so too are the many others who've not had a chance to be heard, have not had a platform. So I think opening up of those doors and those resources is important. So basically what Vyjayanti was talking about listening being important and opening up those kind of doors, I think that's an important step. And what would hinder is, either to paint, the gender sexual minority movement as monolithic, one or the other, when it is not, clearly.
Thank you so much for that. I also just saw Natasha's hand up, but I think it's gone back down. If you want to go ahead and ask a question.
It's definitely still up.
Okay. Sorry about this.
No, not at all. I just first of all want to thank everybody for just one of the most lively, dynamic, and interesting webinars I've been to in a long time. My name's Natasha. I am a graduate student at Oxford, and my research is based on identity formation in the LGBTQ community in Pakistan. And one theme that's emerged that I'm interested to know the Indian perspective on is the sort of the ways in which transnational LGBTQ movements have interfered with and even in some cases harmed LGBTQ activism in Pakistan, because the reality is, the transnational movement emerges from the West and is largely predicated on male, white ideas of queerness. And I would love to know whether this has been a hindrance in LGBTQ identity formation and discourse in India, and whether or not this potential incompatibilities have harmed or interfered with activism.
I can respond briefly on the legal issues. I'm not sure if it thoroughly would answer your questions, would answer your question, but I actually feel that at least on legal activism, there should be more engagement across borders. Because if you see the work around the transgender persons law in India, it's much more regressive than the Pakistan Transgender Persons Act. The Transgender Persons legislation that was passed in Pakistan in 2018 or 19 is far more progressive on gender recognition because it doesn't put all those conditions on changing of your gender from transgender status to male, female, etc., than it is in India. And in the Indian context, strangely, developments in Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal are always seen to be, we are seen to be, we think we are the leaders on legal kind of reform, But I think on trans issues, the leadership has come, for example, from Nepal, because the Supreme Court in Nepal was one of the first in the region that recognized the right to gender identity. There were progressive kind of orders of the Pakistan Supreme Court which led to the act in Pakistan. But I think in India, we have, on the legal reform, we've not engaged much. And I think far from harming, perhaps if we had more collaboration, perhaps it would have been actually more fruitful, I think.
Jayna, I want to quickly step in here and also say that's a very interesting way of thinking about it, right? That sort of international solidarity, not meaning like US organization engaging with India, but rather how do you create South-South cooperation? I also want to sort of just bring in Rafiul and Shubha here with those challenges. Shubha, I think particularly with, logistical challenges around sometimes, yes, can that interference be harmful, but also without that interference, is there enough funding to carry out the work that is possible? And what are the restrictions on that have been imposed more recently with any sort of foreign funding?
Yeah, so I think, it's an interesting question because it does have, the idea of what is the framework or the template that is coming down. And I think, if we take the HIV prevention program very briefly, which was actually, it's a double-edged sword. It allowed, for example, a kind of coming together of gender sexual minorities and female sex workers and, in small towns in a way that had not been possible before. And this money came from USAID and USAID, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, etc. So in one way, it allowed a coming together, it allowed for people to meet each other, it gave them space, etc. And of course, but it was also very limiting because the framework was around, very instrumentalist, and I won't get into the details, but very number driven, very instrumentalist in its orientation. So, and that again of saying that the frameworks of the West don't work, and then invention or discovery or whatever of categories like MSM, males who have sex with males or men who have sex with men. What did that mean for people from the community? Was it an identity that was given to them? Did they actually accept it? Was it an affirmation of something they already were feeling? I think it's a very difficult question to answer in like black and white terms. But quickly to end with the funding issue, I think, again, even though receiving foreign funds has become, as all of us know, become more and more difficult. Not if you're a political party, then it's easy. But if you are doing human rights work, then the screws are really being turned on you, because in all kinds of ways, income tax is used, the FCRA Act is used, and many other things that are being used. And now so much so that if any of your board members gets so much as a traffic challan, your FCRA can be frozen. It's, it's like that. So, and we know where that is coming from, why that is coming, because it's seen that, so I think the relationship with the foreign, I mean, is this going to make us think of more, getting resources from within the country? And if so, then how do you package? You have to package what you're doing, because human rights is still not very palatable. So I think the tensions with, and there has to be healthy tensions with, North imposing kind of frameworks and building South, what Jayna was talking about, South solidarities and envisioning maybe a South Asian vision of what it means for gender sexual minorities, and language and ways to frame. I mean, for example, we use gender sexual minorities and not LGBT, etc. more because the idea of minorities makes us feel closer to, in terms of some protections of minorities in terms of power, and brings the issue of power quite central. And, and also takes in identities that don't fit into LGBT frameworks. Though it's not an exact language at all, it's still approximate.
If anyone else wants to step in, otherwise, Vyjayanti, I actually think it would be really useful for you to elaborate upon what you said in the chat, because this will then get recorded. I don't know if Zoom chats get sort of translated into the transcript of the interview, but there was a very good question from Gaurav, which was about on cis folks speaking with instead of for or on behalf of transgender and gender non-conforming people. And where does that intersection surpass support? And how can cis queer folks who want to contribute with an earnest interest and eventually find their activism, So Vyjayanti, if you want to elaborate on that, that would, I think, your answer and also just larger issues surrounding that today.
I don't think it's just about cis folks and trans folks. It's about, it's a lot about where, to what extent do we speak for, as much as I'm an OBC trans person with a very mild form of disability called dyslexia. I can't speak on behalf of the persons with disabilities. There's so much I need to learn from them about their lived realities. I don't think I should speak on behalf of our queer Muslim friends. I don't think I should speak on behalf of Dalit persons. But what if there is a person who does not have access to technology, is not able to write complaints, is not literate, has no access to media and technology? That's where I must use my privilege to have them use me as a platform to speak for themselves. So that, and insofar as they are comfortable, I don't think I should be pushing them to the limelight if their safety is at stake. So it's all about consent and a lot about informed consent. Before we seek consent, it's our duty when we carry some privileges to inform people that these are the myriad possibilities. This is what could happen, may not happen. So have those long discussions with our friends from various marginalized communities and seek informed consent, signpost. And this is not a one-off conversation. This has to be periodic. This has to be regular. It's not a blanket. Consent is never blanket. Consent has to be sought at every stage. So, and despite all of this, there will be occasions when people will sling mud. I think we should take that with humility, because I think feedback needs to be taken very seriously and not personally. Unfortunately, people take it very personally and trash it instead of taking it seriously.
Since I am also conscious that we only have 15 minutes left, I'm going to club two interesting questions, right? One is from Diksha, which is about that the law is opening itself up to change in favor of LGBTQI plus rights. So now do you think that the requisite change to achieving equal rights should stem from social activism or legal activism? And connected to Ahana's question initially, which is about sort of sensitization programs and queer sensitization in schools and colleges, but also around sensitization of LGBTQ plus teens who do need to be sensitized on issues of casteism and Islamophobia. So I want to sort of see whether, have we really started opening up the conversation around legal rights, or is this as sort of Jayna has pointed out earlier as well, we've gotten decriminalization, but not really any positive rights in many ways. And alongside legal rights, how are these social rights that we are fighting for going to be achieved? And I'd love for anyone to jump in, but Diksha's question was particularly for Vyjayanti and Rafiul. So.
After you, Rafiul.
No, I definitely think that, even, I mean, there's a lot that's happening at this moment in time in India. And as somebody coming from, this two distinct identities, and of course, many more identities, I would say that as much as legal change is important, a lot has to happen socially, not just for queer people, but for everyone else. Because equality has to be substantive equality. Because fear at the end of the day doesn't help anybody, and increasingly we are seeing an atmosphere where you are not, where our democratic rights are and democratic spaces are shrinking. And I think queer rights in this country cannot progress, or queer people cannot achieve the kind of, achieve like that ideal kind of state of freedom if, kind of religious minorities and Dalits and women and trans people in this country are not given their due. So I think that's how I look at it. It's a long battle ahead. I think a lot has to happen. We've had a long drawn legal battle. We've achieved some, rights, even though to a limited extent, it's important and we need to recognize that. But I feel a lot has to happen through our work. That work is difficult, and that work has to continue. Yeah. Sorry, Vyjayanti, go ahead.
Thank you. So I think it should stem primarily from social activism, and I think, and I don't claim to know everything, but in my understanding and experience, much of the journey till now has been through social activism, be it the Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989 that came about after massacres at Karamchedu, and later in Sunduru. So these were grassroots movement, a groundswell of voices that wanted legal change. And law is not meant for itself. Law is not meant for some law students or researchers. Law is meant for we the people. So we the people must bring about that social change. Beat the anti-caste movement, annihilation of caste, or the rights of persons with disabilities, or the HIV Act with its inadequacies, was the result of years and decades of struggles of so many voices, so many lives that were snuffed out, so many voices that persons who could never reap the rich dividends of their toil. It didn't happen during their lifetime. So we don't do activism to see it all during our lifetime. We know that many things may not even fructify during our lifetimes. So it is important that social movements power the engine of law. That said, at the same time, as we do that, we must look beyond horizontally and laterally to see the kind of legal changes of social movements, the jurisprudence, the best in class jurisprudence across the world, so that we don't waste time reinventing the wheel.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to wrap up with one last question, but before that, a quick sort of wrap up of what we discussed. I think this was an incredible panel, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time, with your wisdom, with your stories, and for sharing in this space. I think just from the beginning of this conversation, I think we are in a very peculiar moment today. and one that will require us to reframe conversations around equality and to really lead them in intersectional ways that allow us to form the kinds of solidarities that we've spoken about today, where different movements speak to each other, and while speaking to each other, stand up for each other. And I think that right from the CA NRC protest last year to unfortunately not replicated in the Trans Act protests later on, we've seen in many ways building of solidarities in a moment of extreme crisis and precarity. What I want to end on, I think, is particularly at a time when, with COVID-19, with the sort of destruction of working class populations and the rise in sort of inflammatory and incredibly dangerous rhetoric that we see all around us, and the possibility of something sort of in a moment of a large uncertainty and again precarity, it's very good to sort of have some messages of hope from people who are doing some incredible work. So I'd love for each one of you to just share what is giving you hope right now, what is sort of something that you think is one thing that you can look up to or look out for. And on that note, we will then end this incredible panel. Shall we go with Jayna or Shubha, since you have not spoken in this last question that was asked?
Shubha,
you're on mute.
Okay. So yeah, these are difficult times, and there is, along with our older battles, we're seeing our fights getting intensified, our struggles getting intensified with COVID and all that's happening. But there has been, at least for me, I think the hope is what gives you hope and what keeps you going is that you see the support of friends around you like Vyjayanti and others who are still there fighting. And, we've been working in Telangana together, and her enthusiasm is as much as it was even before the pandemic. And in fact, it's much more because there are there are more issues that are coming up. And so, and I think that's what keeps you going, that when you see that there is so much more to be done, and you see not only the support of people, the enthusiasm of your friends and your activist friends, you see that response in the courts. Of course, it's not all hunky-dory. You do get some good orders, and we struggle to implement them and get the most benefit out of them. But, it's those small one-off orders when you get that keeps you going, and that you say, yes, someone's listening, some things are functioning, and how do we push that? And I think for me, what gives me hope and optimism is that we have to find the little cracks and keep pushing those cracks, and yeah, keep doing that.
Yeah. So.
Sorry. Shubha.
Sorry, Vyjayanti. So just, I think, through this COVID, our work had to, the whole pandemic changed everything about what we were doing. We had to kind of reinvent ourselves and suddenly get into relief work, and also run what we called a call center here practically, because we were talking to people from different states and different languages. But what this was about, and the fact that we could reach so many people in an incredibly short time, was just the complete, the connections we've had with the community for many, many years. And the fact that so many of them took personal risk to ensure that relief reached others. So, police were chasing them, they were facing things of not getting transport, all kinds of problems and issues. But they were still willing to go and do this because this strong bond and strong sense that we should help each other at this time, and coming in a big way, when many other players, including the government that's supposed to be there, when we're talking about citizenship, was conspicuously absent, then I think it was this coming together and, you know, many people sharing whatever they had in you know, and they shouldn't have been. I mean, my thing is, it shouldn't have had to happen. You know, I mean, we could celebrate the courage and all of that, but it really shouldn't have had to happen. You know, and so I think what gives us hope in this time is the bonds that have been formed, and you know, just everyone listening to each other and wanting to be with each other. I think, and also I think some rethink about what the future should be like. You know, the need for more care, to center issues around not self-care as was promoted, but mutual care, where we mutually care and support each other.
After you, Rafiul.
I was about to say after you, Vyjayanti, but so I think, you know, in addition to all that has been shared, because those things give me hope too, I think what's giving me hope at this moment is that we are getting to do some incredible work, build cross, you know, kind of cross-national solidarity at a time when it is so much more important. And I think um, holistic care is a conversation that we are increasingly having, because a lot of us tend to burn out as activists and not take care of ourselves. But I think that is a conversation that we are more intentionally having even in our work now. And it's so I use holistic care because I feel that's more broad and encompassing, as Shubha said, mutual care. And I think we need to create those cultures of care to support each other, not just in the struggle ahead, but also in just reaching out, checking in. I think those are very important things at this point of time, I feel, especially with COVID and just the gloom everywhere. Yeah. Vyjayanti.
So I think many of us and all of us here, the panel and the others, all of us here, as we do activism, we face a lot of failures. But that 101st or 1001st small victory is entirely worth the 1000 failures. It's as simple as that for me. So it doesn't matter to me if these are the things that are blocking my line of sight. I couldn't be bothered about these obstructions. I'm more focused on the goal ahead. So, and I think that's quite the case. Many of us are here on this panel because we are very determined and resilient. So on that note, I am so glad that I was able to participate here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much to our incredible audience that has listened, has asked incredible questions, and I hope we'll take something away from this panel. What is giving me hope is seeing all of you in pink, and this serendipitous coincidence, which in these strange times seems much bigger than one had hoped.
And you are in Baba Saheb Ambedkar's color of blue. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. What I do want to encourage every one of you watching is please reach out to our panelists or to me to donate. COVID-19 is not over. All the people on this sort of panel today are doing incredible, important work, and the initial fundraising sources have sort of trickled away. So any opportunity you get, any sort of space that you find where you have a little bit extra that you can spare, please reach out to any one of us. We all know of so many incredible organizations, people, individuals who need the support, and it's going to require community care because the institutions are simply not standing up for most of us. And I want to finally hand over to Mihir and the Oxford India Society and thank them also for being so incredible, for organizing this panel and for bringing us all here together. Old friends, new friends, and now together comrades alike in many struggles to fight ahead. Thank you so much, everyone. Mihir, over to you.